All right, so today we're going to talk about education policy. In 2016, over 40 million Americans held some kind of student loan debt with a total equaling $1.3 trillion. We have now surpassed credit card debt with our student loan debt. As a country, there's more student loan debt than there is credit card debt. At the same time, state spending on higher education has declined proportionally. That is, so not in raw dollars, but the state universities get a certain percentage of their budget is provided by the state. That states have cut higher education budgets, and so proportionally speaking, more dollars that fund education are from tuition dollars than in state funding. And we have a number of issues that we have to face with education, K through 12 and higher education, because public education helps us fulfill our national goals. Having an educated citizenry helps our commitment to democracy. It helps assimilate immigrants. Uh, it helps social mobility. There is still an educational premium in the job market that people who have more education tend to make more money. So, uh, so we have some problems that we need to face, and we can put these problems in three categories. With the second one, separation of church and state, not having a lot of emphasis in today's presentation or recently, but historically there have been some separation of church and state issues. This includes the Free Exercise Clause. So the Free Exercise Clause establishes the concept that church and state are separate in the United States, even though that separation of church and state phrase is implied in the Constitution. It's not directly stated, and so this creates gray areas when it comes to public education and religion. In the Supreme Court case Engel v. Vitale, 1962, the Supreme Court ruled against any kind of school-sponsored prayer. This is why you can't have a teacher lead a prayer at school. Students can pray. Oftentimes you go to a high school football game, and students will be praying after the football game, but it can't be led by an official, by a public official, or a public employee. So every now and then you see things that make the Supreme Court that are challenges of freedom of religion or separation of church and state issues. But mostly what I want to talk about is funding and quality. These are the things that we focus a lot of our attention in education policy on. So your K through 12 schools are mostly funded through property taxes. And property taxes don't keep up with inflationary costs. They create unequal outcomes where, of course, places with higher property values have a better tax base than places with lower property values. And we're supposed to be creating a public education system that delivers education opportunity to all of our children, regardless of their background. So that creates problems too. And this equity problem, this is an equity problem. Some states and areas spend more on education because of property values. You have better education funding for the schools. These students that go to these schools also have possibly better home lives because they come from more well-to-do families, and then you end up with schools segregated based on income levels, and an equity problem in how we fund our schools. We also have a quality problem. So how do we know that we are providing the right education, a good education to K through 12 students. And so this is where it becomes difficult. It becomes difficult to understand student performance and difficult to measure student performance. Uh, you could say, well, how do students do on test scores, standardized test scores? But then are but then are the good schools only the ones that have the well-to-do students that have the home life that allows them to study more and gives them more stability at home? Does that necessarily make a good school a good education? What about the students that are kind of behind the eight ball in a less well-funded school in a not so great area? Uh, should they be held to the same standard as students that have other advantages? So how do we measure student success? Well, you could say, well, we uh, we measure success in the outcome of standardized testing, but uh, that creates problems for people in disadvantaged areas. You could also say, well, we're going to look at our quality based on improvement. So it doesn't matter where you started as long as you improve. So did the students do better than they did before? Then that would be a quality education because we're not all starting with the same advantages, and that's nice too. But then that disadvantages when it comes to measuring quality education. That disadvantages the schools that do well. If you have a 99% graduation rate, and then the next year you have a 98% graduation rate, then the quality of your education is declining, and now you get a poor score, a poor education score from the state, and your school's not doing well, which of course doesn't make any sense. But that's if you're going by an evaluative measure of quality based on improvement. So there are issues with figuring out what does it mean to have a quality school, what does it mean to have student improvement and solid student outcomes. These performance measures are difficult to implement. And the other thing is one of the other quality issues that relates to that is teacher quality. So how do we determine what teacher quality is? Is this the more qualified when it comes to education? So how many of your teachers have education degrees and then advanced education degrees in master's program, master's level education? Is that part of teacher quality? How many of your teachers in your public schools are teaching within their subject? Because some states allow a lot of teachers to teach outside of their subject, so they can have a bachelor's degree in anything and teach. They can have a bachelor's degree in political science and teach seventh grade math, or something like that. And other states don't allow that. Other states you have to teach within what your education allows you to teach, and then you have other certifications necessary too. Does that measure a quality teacher though? Those credentials, um, uh, and then you have public schools with a tenure system where then it becomes difficult to move or get rid of teachers that are deemed ineffective. Again, hard to figure out what you're judging as effective and ineffective necessarily. If you go back to test scores, do the test scores for the students measure the quality of the teacher necessarily? There's a lot of questions when it comes to quality, and a lot of different mechanisms that can be used to judge quality, and it's difficult to decide what a quality education is through some kind of objective evaluative measure. Of course, students are often asked, did you learn in this class? What are your perceptions of the school? But those perceptions and those comments only go so far. So there's some issues here. One of the other questions when it comes to quality is, does our education system, does becoming an educator attract the right people that do good students become good educators? Do good students make good teachers? Uh, you can argue this a couple different ways. If the incentives, if educators are in the state are compensated poorly, if if it's a very very stressful job, if the qualifications aren't very high, then maybe you cycle through a lot of teachers, you have less stability in the school system, and you're not really providing a quality education, but you're also not going to attract the best people to teach. You're not going to have people who are good at math wanting to teach it for a living. You're not going to have people who understand government wanting to teach it for a living. Uh, the other way to look at this, of course, is do the best of the best actually become good teachers? Because part of being a teacher is struggling with the material and figuring out how you learned it yourself. So sometimes something that comes so naturally to somebody, it makes it hard for them to understand how somebody could struggle with it. So they're actually not very good at teaching it. So teacher quality and education quality is a complicated subject. And there are several education reforms that are used in this area to try and figure these things out, to try and judge what are good schools, who are the good teachers. And one of these education reforms that we discuss extensively is merit pay. This is the idea that raises are based on merit, and having raises based on merit will improve teacher performance. So if you do well at your job, then you earn a merit raise. But then again, this comes back to what's a quality teacher. How do we decide who gets the merit raise? Somebody who's in a school building that teaches all of the advanced math classes, all of the college credit advanced math classes, is going to have really remarkable students who are going to do well on their exams and go on and get accepted to college. Are they necessarily a better teacher because they teach those students than the person at the same school teaching the intro classes that are filled with a bunch of students that don't like math, aren't excited about math, and generally don't do well, haven't done well in the past at math. So they're of course not going to have the same kind of performance on math measures. So do we use those testing scores on standardized test scores, or those performances on grades to decide teacher performance? These test scores ignore a number of factors, like the home life of the students, the types of classes being taught, and it also creates some poor incentives. So merit pay in general is not a terrible idea. It's part of American culture to believe that you work hard, you earn your money. That's how capitalism works. So it's more implementing it that becomes a very difficult task when it comes to public policy. How do you create a merit pay policy that actually rewards the people who are doing the work and the people that are performing well? And what is a quality teacher? The other thing is how motivated are teachers really? Like, does that actually make teachers work harder? Or are you just rewarding the teachers that were already good at what they were doing? If the idea is to motivate teachers to work harder, then the merit pay should be the goal of the teacher. This creates some poor incentives if it's based on student testing, though. If it's based on student testing, then you might end up with things like the Atlanta cheating scandal, where teachers feel like they're put in a position where they're not going to be able to pay their bills, they're not going to be able to save their jobs if their schools continue to underperform. So they're going to fake the exams to make student performance better. So merit pay is one complicated education reform that's implemented in a lot of places, that has been implemented in a number of different ways, um, that has issues, even though it's not necessarily a bad idea. So teacher standards, certification and salaries, so competency tests, so making sure that teachers are competent in the area that they are teaching. This is probably more of an issue when you have people teaching outside of their subject matter than it is when you teach inside your subject matter. Um, uh, One solution to that, besides competency tests, is to stop assigning teachers to teach courses outside of their area, of course. Raise teachers' salaries to be competitive with other professions with those skills. So if you want to attract a better pool of candidates to get into the teaching profession, you have to make it worth being in the teaching profession. So in some states, being a teacher is a career that people stay in for a very long time, and it's a well thought of job, and a good job, a stable job that a lot of people find hard to get, that they have to move around for. In other states, teachers aren't treated as well, and so the salaries are low, and they have a tough time keeping people, and that can create issues in the stability of the schools too. Some other reforms: school vouchers, school choice, and charter schools. So I'll go through these a little bit here. Schools don't schools don't need to improve the product if they have a guaranteed market. The idea here is public education has they don't have competition, and competition creates a market that people strive to do better. So by creating these reforms, vouchers, school choice, and charter schools, you create competition for the public schools that will motivate the schools to compete for students and do a better job. So school choice allows parents to send their children to any public school in a particular area. So you don't have to necessarily send your kids to the school that's within your zip code, that's within your district. Uh, if you can get the student to the other school, then you can send them there. Uh, this creates some issues with tax dollars funding schools. So if your property taxes fund the local schools, but you're sending your kid to a different school, then you might be more likely to vote no on your local levy. If you vote no on your local levy, ultimately you underfund your local school, which then is this vicious cycle of underfunding the school. On the other hand, it does force schools to compete. So then the idea is that they'll be always working to improve because they can attract more students, which would give them more resources. School voucher, so the government provides a certain dollar amount to parents that can apply that dollar amount to private or parochial school tuition as part of the full cost of public school education. So vouchers that would give students the ability to send their kids to private school. The argument for this would be that wealthier families skip over public school anyway and send their kids to these good private schools. School choice the school voucher gives parents the ability to do that even if they don't come from a wealthier background, to send their kids to private schools. So school choice, sending your kid out to any public school outside of where you're living. Uh, School voucher, being able to take money and send your kid to a private school. And then charter schools are government-supported schools. They're supported by the state government, but they're independent in that they're funded by tax dollars, but instead of being run by an elected school board, they're run by a board of directors instead. So it's kind of a public-private partnership. And then, of course, we've talked a lot about school testing reforms. So the No Child Left Behind increased the amount of standardized testing, which makes us wonder: are we over testing students? do we rely too much on standardized testing? Are we teaching our kids to the test? So we simply have turned school into test prep, where you go into school to learn what's going to be on the test so you can pass the test so you can move on, rather than engaging in a more quality learning that might be harder to measure and not so test focused. So school testing reforms also have their issues, but these are different education reforms and different policies that have been used to try and increase student performance, teacher performance, and overall school performance. The last thing I want to talk about is something that um, you are probably familiar with, all of you. Uh, Inflation adjusted tuition and fees from 1986 through just a few years ago, 2017. And as you can see, the cost of higher education has gone up. Tuition is rising faster than inflation, even though there still is an educational premium. So people with higher education do make more money, and once you make more money, you make that premium every year for the rest of your career, hopefully. So there's still strong incentives for people to go to college, but college is becoming ridiculously expensive, and so there are a number of reasons for that. Some of it is bloated administrative costs. So colleges have to compete for students. So what do? In order to compete for students, they build really nice dorm rooms and really great cafeterias and all these different extracurricular kind of activity places, and to try and attract students. And they sink a lot of money into those things, and they have to have administrators for those things, directors of whatever it may be, and so those costs have gone up because the colleges are competing, building and creating new things to compete. The other thing is a free market competition. So the need for college education to get a job these days is greater than before. For example, when my father graduated high school in 1976, he didn't have to go to college. He could have gone and worked on the coal docks, or he could have worked for the auto factory, and he didn't need a college education to do a bunch of things he could have done and made a good living. Those manufacturing jobs, those unskilled labor positions are fewer and fewer. So there's a greater need for education to succeed in the workforce. And even if you've talked to somebody recently who works at a manufacturing plant, they work with computers and robots, and so there's a greater need for people who are well educated to even do these things that you used to not have to have much education to do. And because there's a greater need for it, that means people are willing to pay or take out the loans to do so. So some of it is a reaction to a free market. It's become more necessary to have a bachelor's degree over the years, so people are willing to spend to go get one. All right, so that's an overview of education policy and reforms, and that's all I have for you. Thank you.